The escape pod shook as another system failed. Red warning lights flashed across the small control panel, but Cathara no longer bothered to look at them. She knew what they meant. Life support was running out. The air recycler had stopped working 3 days ago. The water purifier had given up a week before that. She floated in the pilot's seat, her blue-scaled hands resting on her knees. Her large golden eyes stared through the small window at the stars ahead. Somewhere out there was the Galactic Assembly Station. Her only hope. The pod's computer spoke in a flat voice. Life support at 15%. Estimated time remaining, 6 hours, 12 minutes. 6 hours. Cathara closed her eyes and tried not to think about it. Instead, she thought about home. About Violinus Prime, with its purple skies and silver seas. About the great crystal cities that had stood for 10,000 years. About her mate, Veltar. The memory came back like it always did. Sharp and painful. The ground had been shaking for hours. Buildings fell like toys as massive ships appeared in the sky. Not ships really. More like flying factories. They dropped down from space and began eating everything they touched. Metal, stone, plants, people, everything. They call themselves the Scourge, Veltar had said, reading reports on his communication device. They turn everything into raw materials. They build more of themselves. Cathara had packed their emergency bag with shaking hands. How long do we have? The military thinks maybe 2 days. The outer cities are already gone. But it had not taken 2 days. It had taken 6 hours. The evacuation center was chaos. Thousands of Velans pushing toward the handful of escape pods. Families were separated. Children cried for their parents. The lucky ones got seats on ships heading to the outer system. Cathara and Veltar had waited in line for 3 hours. When they finally reached the front, only one pod was left. A small emergency unit meant for one person. Take it, Veltar had said. No, we go together or not at all. Cathara, look at me. His voice was gentle but firm. One of us has to survive. One of us has to tell the galaxy what happened here. You are stronger than me. You will make it. She had shaken her head, but he was already pushing her toward the pod. I cannot leave you. You are not leaving me. You are carrying me with you. My memories. My love. Our people's story. He touched her face with his hand. Promise me you will tell them. Promise me the galaxy will know what the Valen were. What we built. What we loved. The building shook again. Through the windows, they could see the Scourge machines getting closer. They moved like hungry animals, tearing apart everything in their path. I promise, she whispered. Veltar sealed her inside the pod and activated the launch sequence. The last thing she saw through the window was his face, calm and sad. As the pod shot into the sky, she had watched from space as her world died. The Scourge ships covered the surface like a disease. They dug deep into the planet's core, taking everything. When they were done, nothing was left but empty space and floating debris. 3 billion Velans. Gone. Now she was the last one. The only witness to what had happened. The pod's computer spoke again. Approaching Nexus Prime System. Galactic Assembly Station detected. Requesting permission to dock. Cathara opened her eyes. Through the window, she could see the massive station ahead. It looked like a metal flower floating in space, with hundreds of docking ports extending like petals. Ships from across the galaxy came and went like busy insects. This is Assembly Station Control, a voice said through the communication system. State your business. Cathara activated the microphone with a weak hand. This is Cathara of Valinus Prime. I request emergency asylum and an audience with the Assembly. There was a long pause. Valinus Prime is not in our records as a current member world. It is gone. Destroyed. I am here to warn the Assembly about a threat to all species. Another pause. Stand by for security scan. Blue light filled the pod as the station's scanners examined her and her ship. Cathara waited. She had no weapons. No dangerous materials. Just the data files about the Scourge and the clothes on her back. You are cleared for docking. Bay 712. Medical teams are standing by. The pod moves slowly toward the station. Cathara watched as the docking bay opened to receive her. Soon, she would stand before the greatest gathering of intelligent species in the galaxy. Surely they would listen. Surely they would understand the danger. The pod settled into the docking bay with a soft thud. Air hissed as the bay pressurized. Through the small window, she could see alien figures in medical suits approaching. They moved carefully, as if she might be dangerous. Cathara tried to stand, but her legs were weak from weeks in the small pod. She had lost weight. Her scales had lost their shine. She looked like what she was, a refugee, a survivor. The last of her kind. The pod door opened with a click. Cool, clean air rushed in. It smelled strange. Not like home, but it was breathable. "Welcome to Assembly Station," one of the medical workers said. The translation device in her ear turned his words into her language. "I am Dr. Kale of the Zenthi Medical Course. We need to examine you before you can enter the main station." Cathara nodded weakly. "I understand. But please, I need to speak to the Assembly as soon as possible. The threat that destroyed my world, it will not stop. It will come for all of us." Dr. Kale helped her out of the pod. "The Assembly has been notified of your arrival. They will see you when you are cleared by medical." As they led her away from the pod, Cathara looked back once. The small ship had carried her across hundreds of light years. It had been her home, her prison, and her salvation. Now it sat empty in the docking bay, just another piece of space junk. But she was alive. She had made it. Soon, she would tell the galaxy about the Scourge, about Valenus Prime, about Veltar and all the others who had died. She would keep her promise. The Great Assembly Chamber was bigger than any building Cathara had ever seen. Thousands of seats rose up in curved rows, each one filled with representatives from different worlds. She had never seen so many different species in one place. Some looked almost like Velans, with scales and tall bodies. Others were completely alien. Floating gas clouds with mechanical translators. Rock-like beings that barely moved. Creatures made of pure energy that flickered like flames. At the center of the chamber was a small platform where she now stood. Bright lights shone down on her, making her feel exposed and small. Around the platform, holographic displays showed her image to every seat in the chamber. The Speaker of the Assembly was a Corvan, one of the oldest spacefaring races. His gray skin was covered in ritual scars that showed his high rank. He looked down at Cathara with cold, dark eyes. "The Assembly recognizes Cathara of Valenus Prime," he said, reading from his datapad. "You have requested emergency session time to address a threat to galactic security. You may proceed." Cathara's throat was dry. In the 3 days since her arrival, she had practiced this speech over and over. But now, standing before nearly 1,000 different species, the words felt small and inadequate. "Honored representatives," she began. Her voice shook slightly. "I come before you as the last survivor of my world. 3 weeks ago, Valenus Prime was completely destroyed by an enemy we had never seen before. They call themselves the Scourge." Murmurs rose from the chamber. Some representatives leaned forward with interest. Others looked bored. A few were clearly doing other work on their personal devices. "The Scourge are machines," Cathara continued. "But they are not like any artificial intelligence we know. They do not want to rule or conquer. They want to consume. They break down everything they find into raw materials and use those materials to build more of themselves. She activated the holographic display beside her. Images appeared in the air above the chamber. Her homeworld as it had been, beautiful, green, alive. Then came the recordings from the final day. The massive scourge ships descending like black storms. Cities being torn apart piece by piece. The planet's surface stripped away layer by layer. In 18 hours, they reduced a world of 3 billion souls to empty space, Cathara said. Her voice was stronger now, fueled by anger and grief. They took everything. The cities, the forests, the oceans, even the planet's core. Nothing was left except debris floating in space. The images showed the final recordings. Her world being eaten alive. The last few escape pods fleeing into space before being destroyed by Scourge patrol ships. She had been the only one to escape. I have brought tactical data, she said, activating another display. The Scourge follow predictable patterns. They move from system to system along specific routes. They target worlds with the highest concentration of useful materials. Based on their previous movements, I can predict where they will strike next. The display showed a star map with projected Scourge movements. Red arrows pointed toward inhabited systems. Dozens of worlds were in their path. The next target is likely Helios 7, home to 2 billion Threnody. After that, the Kepler mining colonies. Then the Alteron core worlds. Tanara looked around the chamber, trying to make eye contact with as many representatives as possible. Eventually, they will reach every inhabited system in the galaxy. They will not stop. They cannot be negotiated with or reasoned with. They exist only to consume. She paused, gathering her courage for the final part of her speech. I am not here to ask for vengeance. I am not here to demand compensation for what was lost. I am here to warn you. The Scourge represent a threat to all life in the galaxy. If we do not act now, together, every world will suffer the same fate as mine. Cathara's voice broke slightly. I watched my mate die so that I could escape and bring you this warning. 3 billion Velans died believing that someone would listen, that someone would care. Please, do not let their sacrifice be meaningless. The chamber fell silent. For a moment, Cathara felt hope. Maybe she had reached them. Maybe they understood. Then the questions began. Representative Thal of the Alteron hegemony was the first to speak. The data you have presented is interesting. But how can we verify its accuracy? How do we know this Scourge is not simply a natural disaster being misrepresented? I have video recordings, Cathara said. Sensor data. Testimony from survivors on other ships. Testimony from one survivor, Representative Thal corrected. Forgive me, but traumatic events can affect memory and perception. What you believe you saw may not be what actually happened. The Zenti delegate raised a mechanical appendage. Even assuming your data is accurate, the cost of a military response would be enormous. The Zenti have analyzed the tactical situation. To defeat an enemy of this magnitude would require the combined fleets of at least 50 major worlds. The economic impact would be devastating. More devastating than losing every world in the galaxy? Cathara asked. The Zenti must consider cost-benefit analysis. Your people numbered only 3 billion. The resource cost of saving them would have exceeded their economic contribution to galactic society by a factor of 12. Cathara felt like she had been struck. You are talking about lives, about people, about families and children and dreams and art and music and love. How do you put a price on that? The Zenti representative's mechanical voice showed no emotion. Everything has a price. Resources are finite. Difficult decisions must be made. More representatives spoke up. Each one found new reasons why action was impossible. The scourge was too far away to be an immediate threat. The data was insufficient. The military requirements were too demanding. The political complications were too complex. The Corvin speaker called for order. The Assembly will now vote on Resolution 2847C, emergency military action against the entity known as the Scourge. Cathara watched as the vote was tallied in real time on the main display. Red lights appeared across the chamber as representative after representative voted against the resolution. A few yellow lights showed abstentions, but almost no green lights showed support. Resolution 2847C fails by a vote of 785 against, 61 abstentions, and 1 in favor. The speaker announced, 1 vote. Out of 847 representatives, only 1 had voted to help. Cathara stared at the display in shock. She had known it would be difficult, but she had never imagined such complete rejection. How could they sit there and listen to her story and choose to do nothing? The petitioner's time has expired, the speaker said. The Assembly thanks you for bringing this matter to our attention. You may remain on the station as a refugee under Article 15 of the Galactic Accords. That was it. They were dismissing her. After everything she had shown them, everything she had told them, they were sending her away like an unwanted visitor. Cathara looked around the chamber one more time. Most of the representatives were already leaving, moving on to other business. A few looked at her with what might have been sympathy, but none of them spoke. She walked slowly off the platform, her legs feeling weak again. In the hallway outside the chamber, she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. She had failed. Veltar and all the others had died for nothing. The galaxy would not listen. The galaxy did not care. Excuse me. Cathara opened her eyes. A woman was standing nearby. She was obviously human, with pale skin and brown hair pulled back in a simple style. She was wearing a blue uniform with unfamiliar markings. I voted for your resolution, the woman said quietly. I am Ambassador Elena Vasquez of the Human Federation. I wonder if we could talk. Ambassador Elena Vasquez led Cathara through the winding corridors of the station. The human woman walked with purpose, her blue uniform crisp and clean. Other representatives they passed in the hallways barely glanced at them. To most of the galaxy, humans were still a new species, young and unimportant. I have a private office in the diplomatic sector, Elena said as they walked. We can talk there without interruption. Cathara followed in silence. She was still in shock from the Assembly's rejection. How could they have listened to her story and chosen to do nothing? How could they put economics and politics above the survival of entire worlds? Elena's office was small but comfortable. The walls were decorated with images of Earth, showing blue oceans and green continents under white clouds. It looked peaceful, beautiful, nothing like the mechanical coldness of the assembly chamber. Please sit, Elena said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. Would you like some water? Food? I know the medical teams have been taking care of you, but sometimes it helps to eat something familiar when you are stressed. Cathara settled into the chair. I do not think you have any Valen food here. No, probably not. But we might have something similar. Humans are good at adapting things. Elena sat down behind her desk and looked directly at Cathara. I want you to know that I believe every word you said in there. And I want to help. You were the only one who voted for the resolution. Yes, though I should mention that several other representatives wanted to support it, but were bound by their government's instructions. Politics is complicated, even when lives are at stake. Elena leaned forward. But humans operate a bit differently than most species in the assembly. How do you mean? We are still new to galactic politics. We have been part of the assembly for less than 50 years. Most species see us as young and impulsive. Sometimes they are right. Elena smiled slightly. But that also means we are not bound by centuries of tradition and careful calculation. When we see someone who needs help, we try to help them. Cathara felt a spark of hope, but she tried not to let it grow too large. She had been disappointed too many times already. What can you do? The Assembly will not act. Without their support, any military action would be impossible. The Assembly will not act as a unified body, Elena corrected. But individual members can make their own decisions. And the Human Federation has already made ours. Before Cathara could ask what she meant, the office door chimed. Elena called for the visitor to enter, and 2 more humans stepped inside. The first was a man in a military uniform, tall and serious-looking with short black hair and calm eyes. The second was a woman in a white lab coat, younger than Elena, with dark skin and an eager expression. Cathara, this is Captain Marcus Chun of the United Earth Fleet, Elena said. And Dr. Sarah Okafor, our lead xenobiologist. Captain Chun nodded respectfully. I am sorry for the loss of your world and your people. I want you to know that the Human Federation takes your warning very seriously. Dr. Okafor stepped forward, her eyes bright with interest. I have been studying the data you provided about the Scourge. Their technology is unlike anything we have seen before. But I think there might be ways to fight them. Cathara looked between the 3 humans. I do not understand. Are you saying that humanity will act alone against the Scourge? Without Assembly support? That is exactly what we are saying, Elena replied. The Assembly may have rejected your plea, but humanity will not. We cannot sit by and watch entire worlds be destroyed when we have the power to do something about it. But you are just one species, Cathara said. The Zenti delegate was right about one thing. The Scourge would require massive military force to defeat. How can humans alone hope to succeed where the entire Assembly fears to act? Captain Chun spoke up. You are right that we cannot match the combined military might of 800 species. But we do not need to. We just need to be smart about how we fight. He activated a holographic display that showed the human fleet positions throughout the galaxy. Small clusters of ships scattered across dozens of systems. The Human Federation operates 127 deep space vessels, Chun said. Not large by galactic standards, but every ship is crewed by volunteers who believe in protecting innocent life. When Admiral Torres received your data 3 hours ago, she immediately issued mobilization orders. Your data shows the Scourge moving toward Helios 7, Elena added. That gives us approximately 6 weeks to prepare. Human ships are already moving into position. Dr. Okafor pulled out her own datapad. I have been analyzing the biological samples you provided. Genetic material, tissue samples, neural patterns. Even though your people are gone, their memory does not have to be lost forever. Cathara stared at her. What do you mean? With your permission, I would like to preserve as much Valen genetic information as possible. Not to clone your people, we do not have that technology, but to ensure that future generations will know what the Valen were like. Your biology, your evolution, your unique place in galactic history. Why? Cathara asked. Why would you care about preserving my people's memory? You never knew us. We had no alliance with humanity. We could offer you nothing in return. Elena's eyes grew soft. Because it is the right thing to do. Every species that has ever existed has contributed something unique to the universe. When a species dies, that contribution is lost forever. We cannot bring back your people, but we can make sure they are not forgotten. And because no one should have to face extinction alone, Captain Chun added quietly, every thinking being deserves someone to stand with them when darkness comes. Cathara felt tears forming in her large golden eyes. For the first time since Veltar had pushed her into the escape pod, she felt like someone truly understood her loss. "I watched the assembly session," Dr. Okafor said. "I saw how they treated your testimony, how they reduced your people's lives to economic calculations. That is not how humans think. How do humans think?" Cathara asked. Elena stood up and moved to the window. Outside, ships from hundreds of different worlds move through space around the station. "We think that every life has value, that every voice deserves to be heard, that when someone asks for help, you help them if you can. It does not matter if they are from your species or your world or your political alliance." She turned back to Cathara. 50 years ago, when humans first reached the stars, we were afraid. We thought we might be alone in the universe. When we discovered other intelligent life, we were amazed and grateful. Every species we met taught us something new about what it means to be alive and aware. The assembly representatives see the Valen as an extinct species with limited strategic value, Captain Chun said. "We see them as our teachers who can no longer share their wisdom. That loss diminishes all of us." Dr. Okafor nodded eagerly. "From what you have told me, Valen crystal growing technology was centuries ahead of anything else in the galaxy. Your people's art forms were completely unique. Your philosophical traditions influenced 3 other species' development of ethical frameworks. You know about our philosophy?" Cathara asked in surprise. "I have been studying every record I could find about your people since your arrival. The Valen concept of shared existence has been referenced in scientific papers across multiple disciplines." Sarah's voice was full of genuine enthusiasm. "Your people contributed so much to galactic knowledge. Losing that perspective forever would be a tragedy for everyone." Elena returned to her desk. "The Human Federation has made its decision. We will help you fight the Scourge. We will work to preserve your people's legacy. And we will make sure the galaxy understands what was lost when Valenus Prime died." Cathara closed her eyes, feeling overwhelmed. "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything," Elena replied gently. "You have already given us everything we need. Your warning, your data, your testimony. Now let us give you something in return. What is that?" Elena smiled, and for the first time since her escape, Cathara saw something she had thought she would never see again. Hope. The UEF Defiance was not the largest ship Cathara had ever seen, but it felt alive in a way that surprised her. As Captain Chun led her through the corridors, she could hear voices everywhere. Humans working, planning, preparing for battle. Their energy was infectious. "How many people are aboard this ship?" she asked as they passed a group of engineers discussing weapon modifications. 800 crew members, Chun replied, plus about 50 civilians. Researchers, diplomats, medical specialists. Everyone who wanted to help. They stopped at an observation deck where Cathara could see out into space. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Ships were arriving from every direction. Human vessels of all sizes, from massive battleships to small patrol craft. They formed up in organized formations, their lights blinking in the darkness like stars. "How many ships?" she whispered. 127 at last count, Chun said. Every deep space vessel in the Human Federation. Admiral Torres called for volunteers only. Every single ship answered. A woman in an admiral's uniform approached them. She was older than Chun, with gray hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of years in command. But her voice was steady and strong when she spoke. "Admiral Rebecca Torres," she said, extending her hand to Cathara. "I am in command of the human fleet. I want to personally thank you for your warning about the Scourge." Cathara took her hand, still amazed by the human custom of physical contact as greeting. "Admiral, I must ask, are you certain about this?" Your entire fleet is risking themselves for people you have never met. The Threnody of Helios 7 are not even allies of humanity. They are living beings facing extinction, Torres replied simply. That makes them worth protecting. She gestured toward the gathering fleet. Do you see that ship there? The one with the red markings? That is the UEF Harmony. It came from our colony at Wolf 359. They stripped their entire defense fleet to send us ships. Cathara followed her gaze. Is their colony not vulnerable without defenses? Very vulnerable. But they decided that stopping the Scourge was more important than their own immediate safety. Torres pointed to another group of ships. Those 6 vessels came from the mining stations at Kepler 442. The miners voted to give up their escort ships and protection contracts. They said preventing genocide was worth the risk. I do not understand, Cathara said. Why would they sacrifice their own safety for strangers? Torres was quiet for a moment, studying the assembled fleet. When humans first learned about the Holocaust, a genocide that happened on Earth centuries ago, we made a promise. We said, never again. We meant it not just for humans, but for everyone. Chun nodded. Every human child learns about the dangers of standing by while others suffer. We teach them that good people have a responsibility to act when they witness evil, even when it costs them? Cathara asked. Especially then, Torres said firmly. A young officer approached and saluted. Admiral, Dr. Okafor requests your presence in the science lab. She says she has important findings about the Scourge. Torres nodded. Captain Chun, please escort our guest there as well. I think she will want to hear this. The science lab was bustling with activity. Human researchers worked alongside holographic displays showing Scourge technology and movement patterns. Dr. Okafor looked up from her workstation as they entered, her face bright with excitement. Admiral, Cathar, perfect timing. I think I have figured out how the Scourge operates. She activated a large display showing a 3-dimensional model of a Scourge ship. The vessel was unlike anything in human or galactic design, with flowing organic curves that seemed to shift and change as they watched. The Scourge ships are not just machines, Sarah explained. They are more like living organisms. They grow rather than being built. Each ship contains millions of smaller units that work together like cells in a body. How does that help us fight them? Torres asked. Because like any living organism, they have weaknesses. Sarah highlighted different parts of the ship model. They need constant resources to maintain themselves. They have central coordination nodes that control the smaller units. And most importantly, they follow biological imperatives rather than strategic thinking. Cathara leaned closer to study the display. What kind of biological imperatives? They prioritize immediate consumption over long-term planning. They always take the most resource-rich target available, even if a strategic choice would be smarter. And they cannot resist feeding opportunities. Sarah changed the display to show the Helios 7 system. The Threnody have built their civilization around asteroid mining. Helios 7 itself is mostly empty of valuable minerals. But the asteroid belt contains massive amounts of rare elements. So the Scourge will focus on the asteroids first, Chun said, understanding immediately. Exactly. Which gives us a tactical advantage. Sarah smiled. If we can position our fleet in the asteroid belt before they arrive, we can force them to fight in an environment that favors smaller, more maneuverable ships. Admiral Torres studied the tactical display. How much time do we have? 4 weeks, Cathara answered. Maybe less, depending on how much resistance they encounter at their current target. Then we better get moving. Torres turned to address the entire lab. I want full analysis of Scourge combat capabilities within 48 hours. Weapon recommendations, tactical suggestions, everything we need to give our people the best chance of survival. As the humans returned to their work, Cathara felt overwhelmed by their dedication. Dr. Okafor, may I ask you something personal? Of course. You are spending your time trying to save my people's genetic legacy and studying ways to fight the scourge. But you could be doing research that directly benefits humanity. Why choose to help strangers instead? Sarah paused in her work and looked at Cathara directly. Because the universe is better when it has more different kinds of thinking beings in it. Every species sees reality a bit differently, solves problems in unique ways, creates art and music and stories that no one else could imagine. She gestured toward the genetic samples she had taken from Cathara. Your people developed crystal growing techniques that could revolutionize human architecture. But more than that, Valen philosophy about shared existence could help humans understand cooperation better. When the Scourge destroyed your world, they did not just kill 3 billion individuals. They eliminated an entire way of thinking about life and consciousness. The galaxy is smaller and poorer without the Valen perspective, Chan added. If we can prevent the same thing from happening to the Threnody or any other species, then we preserve that diversity that makes the universe interesting. Torres rejoined their conversation. Humans believe that every voice adds something valuable to the galactic chorus. When voices are silenced by violence, the whole universe suffers. That evening, Cathara stood alone in her guest quarters aboard the Defiance. Through the small window, she could see the human fleet continuing to grow as more ships arrived. Each vessel represented people who had volunteered to risk their lives for strangers. A soft chime indicated someone at her door. She opened it to find a young human woman holding a tray of food. "Hi, I am Lieutenant Sarah Kim from Communications," the woman said. "I brought you dinner. Dr. Okafor mentioned you might not be eating enough." Cathara accepted the tray gratefully. "Thank you. That is very kind. Actually, I wanted to ask you something," Kim said. "Would you be willing to record some messages about your people? Not for tactical purposes, just personal things. What Valens like to do for fun. What your music sounded like. Stories you told children. Why would you want to record such things?" Kim looked slightly embarrassed. "A bunch of us have been talking, and we realized that if we only preserve the scientific and historical data about your people, we will miss what made them really special. The everyday things that made Valens who they were." Cathar felt tears forming again. "You want to preserve our culture, not just our biology. If that is okay with you." We thought, well, if we survive the battle against the Scourge, maybe someday we could create a memorial. Not just a database, but a place where people could come to learn about what the Valen were really like. Cathara set down the food tray and took Kim's hands in her own scaled ones. "Yes, I would be honored to record those memories." After Kim left, Cathara returned to the window. The human fleet stretched across space like a constellation of hope. For the first time since her escape, she believed that Veltar's sacrifice might lead to something good. The Valen would not be forgotten. Other species would not have to face extinction alone. Humanity had heard her cry for help across the vast emptiness of space thought, and they had answered. The first Scourge ships appeared at the edge of the Helios 7 system like dark wounds in space. Cathar watched from the bridge of the Defiance as the enemy fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel. Even through the tactical display, she could feel the wrongness of them. They moved like hungry predators, flowing toward the inner system where billions of Threnody civilians waited. "Scourge fleet composition confirmed," reported the tactical officer. 47 harvesting vessels, 12 escort craft, and 1 command ship. Total mass approximately 15 times our fleet size. Admiral Torres studied the display calmly. "Captain Chun, signal the fleet." Execute Operation Asteroid. The human ships had been hiding in the asteroid belt for 3 days, using the massive rocks for cover. Now they moved into position according to the plan Dr. Okafor had developed. The Scourge would have to come through the belt to reach Helios. 7. The asteroids would limit their ability to maneuver and give the smaller human ships an advantage. Incoming transmission from Helios. 7. The communications officer announced, "Admiral, it is Governor the Cuna of the Threnody Collective." The main screen shifted to show a tall, thin alien with blue-green skin and large compound eyes. His expression was a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "Admiral Torres, the Collective is amazed by humanity's response to our crisis. We had no formal alliance, no trade agreements, no mutual defense treaties. Why have you come to help us?" Torres replied without hesitation, "Because you asked for help, Governor." "That is reason enough." Governor the Cuna was quiet for a moment. "Most of my people believed that no one would come, that we would face extinction alone. You have given us hope. Just keep your civilian evacuation ships moving toward the outer system," Torres said. "We will buy you as much time as we can." The Scourge fleet was approaching the asteroid belt now. Their ships moved in perfect formation, like a school of metal fish swimming through space. As they entered the belt, they began to do exactly what Dr. Okafor had predicted. The Scourge could not resist the resource-rich asteroids. They immediately began harvesting operations, tearing apart the massive rocks for raw materials. "All ships, commence attack," Torres ordered. The human fleet exploded out of hiding. Ships that had been concealed behind asteroids suddenly appeared with weapons blazing. The Scourge had expected easy prey, but they found themselves under attack from all directions. Cathara gripped her chair as the Defiance shook under enemy fire. Through the viewport, she could see the battle unfolding in terrible silence. Human ships darted between asteroids like swift birds, using hit-and-run tactics against the larger Scourge vessels. Explosions blossomed in the darkness as ships from both sides were destroyed. "Direct hit on Scourge Harvester 3, Tactical reported. She is breaking apart." But the Scourge were adapting quickly. Their ships began to coordinate their defense, using the smaller escort craft to hunt down human vessels while the Harvesters continued their work. "We are losing ships faster than we are destroying theirs," Chun observed grimly. Torres nodded. "Signal Captain Rodriguez on the Marathon. Execute final gambit." The Marathon was one of the largest ships in the human fleet. As Cathara watched, the massive vessel changed course and headed directly toward the Scourge command ship. Its engines burned at maximum power, accelerating far beyond safe limits. "What are they doing?" Cathara asked. "Ramming attack," Torres replied quietly. Captain Rodriguez volunteered. "She knows her ship cannot survive, but if she can take out the command ship, the rest of the Scourge fleet will lose coordination." On the screen, they could see the Marathon taking terrible damage as it charged toward its target. Human weapons fire covered its approach, but Scourge defenses were overwhelming. The Marathon's hull cracked and atmosphere vented into space. But still it flew on. The collision was visible even from their distance. The Marathon struck the Scourge command ship at full speed, and both vessels disappeared in a brilliant explosion. The shockwave shattered nearby asteroids and sent debris flying in all directions. Immediately, the effect was visible throughout the Scourge fleet. The harvesting ships stopped their coordinated movements and began operating independently. Some continued harvesting. Others moved to attack the nearest human ships. The careful formation broke down into chaos. "Now we have a chance," Torres said. "All ships, target the Harvesters. Take them down one by one." The battle raged for 6 hours. Human ships struck at scourge harvesters and fled before the larger vessels could respond effectively. One by one, the enemy ships were destroyed. But the cost was terrible. Of the 127 ships that had begun the battle, only 63 remained operational. When the last scourge ship finally exploded, the human fleet was battered and exhausted. But they had won. Helios 7 was safe. "Admiral," the communications officer called out. "Incoming transmissions from across the galaxy. The Assembly is requesting immediate emergency session." 3 days later, Cathara stood once again before the Galactic Assembly. But this time, everything was different. The chamber was packed with representatives who hung on every word. The Speaker of the Assembly, the same Corvin who had dismissed her before, now looked at her with respect. "The Assembly recognizes Cathara of Valinus Prime," he announced. "Witness to the Scourge threat, an advisor to the human military response that saved Helios 7. Cathara looked out at the assembled representatives. Many of the same beings who had voted against helping her before now leaned forward eagerly. The Threnody delegation occupied a place of honor in the front row, their blue-green faces grateful and amazed. "Honored representatives," she began. "3 weeks ago, I stood in this same place and told you about the Scourge. I begged you to act. You listened to my story and decided that the cost was too high, the risk too great, the strategic value too small." The chamber was absolutely silent. "You were not wrong about the costs. The human fleet lost 64 ships and nearly 8,000 brave souls in the defense of Helios 7. You were not wrong about the risks. Admiral Torres told me that the odds of success were less than 30% when they began their mission." She paused, looking around the chamber. "But you were wrong about what matters. You calculated the economic value of my people and found us lacking. You measured the strategic importance of the Threnody and deemed them expendable. You made your decisions based on profit and politics and careful risk assessment." Cathara's voice grew stronger. "Humanity made their decision based on something different. They heard someone cry for help, and they answered. They did not ask what my people could offer in return. They did not calculate the cost-benefit ratio of saving Threnody lives. They simply heard that innocent beings were in danger, and they acted." She gestured toward the human delegation, where Ambassador Vasquez sat with tears in her eyes. "In the battle for Helios 7, Captain Maria Rodriguez flew her ship directly into the enemy command vessel, knowing she would die. Her last transmission was not about glory or victory. She said, 'Tell the Threnody children they can go home.'" Now, several representatives in the chamber made sounds of amazement or emotion. Commander Sarah Kim worked for 72 hours straight to coordinate evacuation efforts, making sure that every Threnody transport reached safety. When asked why she pushed herself so hard, she said, "Because every family deserves to stay together." Cathara looked directly at the Zenti representative who had spoken of cost-benefit analysis. Dr. Sarah Okafor spent her time developing weapons to fight the Scourge, but she also spent her time preserving genetic samples and cultural records of my dead people. When I asked her why, she said, "Because the universe is better when it has more voices in it." The Zenti representative's mechanical form seemed to slump slightly. "Today, 2 billion Threnody are alive because one species chose to care more about life than profit. Because one species chose to value courage over calculation. Because one species understood that civilization is not measured by technology or territory or economic power. Chaos." Voice rose to fill the entire chamber. "Civilization is measured by who you save when no one is watching. It is measured by what you do when helping others costs you something. It is measured by whether you choose to answer when someone cries for help." She gestured toward Governor Decuna, who had come to personally thank the Assembly. "The Threnody will remember this day forever. They will tell their children about the species that crossed the galaxy to save them. But they will not remember the assembly that calculated their worth and found them lacking. They will remember the humans who heard their cry and answered. The chamber erupted in discussion as representatives turned to each other, speaking in dozens of different languages. But Cathara was not finished. The Scourge are still out there. The battle at Helios 7 was a victory, but it was not the war. There are other threats in the galaxy, other species who will face extinction, other worlds that will cry out for help. She looked around the chamber one final time. When those cries come, you will have a choice. You can calculate costs and assess strategic value and debate political complications. Or you can remember what humanity taught us. That every voice matters. That every life has value. That good people answer when others call for help. Cathara stepped back from the podium,